His voice was low, almost lost beneath the echo of boots on concrete and the constant hum of the heating pipes. The shelter sat on the edge of a small Russian town, a former cultural hall from Soviet days, its paint peeling, its high windows fogged with winter breath. Outside, snow fell in thick, silent sheets covering the streets like a clean lie. Beautiful, cold, unforgiving. The old man stood near the entrance, his back slightly bent, clutching a worn canvas bag. His coat was too thin for January, its buttons mismatched, its collar frayed. A faded wool hat shadowed his eyes, but when he lifted his head they were sharp, blue, tired and deeply alert, as if sleep had long ago stopped visiting him. People passed by without slowing. In winter, suffering became ordinary. Everyone here carried their own. "Sir, please move inside," the volunteer said, distracted, already turning toward another person. "There's soup." The old man shook his head slowly. Snow melted into dark spots on the floor beneath his boots. "She won't eat," he repeated, this time clearer. 2 days now." The volunteer paused, sighed softly, and faced him again. "Your granddaughter's here with you?" "No," he answered. "She's waiting." From the bag, he carefully pulled out a guitar, old, cracked along the body, its strings dull with age. It looked like something that had survived wars, moves, losses. Like its owner. A man nearby muttered, "Another street singer," and turned away. The old man didn't react. He simply ran his fingers over the strings. Not playing yet, just touching them as if greeting an old friend. His hands were rough, the nails short, the skin split from cold and work long past. "She listens," he said, almost to himself. "When I sing, she remembers how it feels to be full." The volunteer frowned, unsure what to say. Mental illness, grief, hunger. It all blended together here. But there was something in his posture, in the way he stood firmly despite the years, that made her hesitate. "Go on," she said quietly. "You can sit there." The old man nodded in gratitude and took a step forward. No one yet understood that the words they had nearly ignored were the beginning of something they would never forget. The old man sat on a low wooden chair near the wall, where a faded mural of birch trees still clung to the plaster. Leftover beauty from a time when this hall had hosted concerts and school recitals. The chair creaked under his weight, but he settled into it carefully, as if every movement mattered. Around him, people continued talking, the clatter of bowls and the hiss of ladles filling the air. Life did not stop just because someone sat down with a guitar. He placed the instrument across his knee and leaned forward, shoulders slightly hunched. For a long moment, he did nothing. His fingers hovered above the strings, trembling not with fear but with cold and memory. He closed his eyes, inhaled deeply, and the room seemed to draw breath with him. Then he played. The first chord was soft, almost apologetic. It rang out thinly at first, swallowed by the high ceiling. A few heads turned, annoyed more than curious. Street musicians were common near metro stations, but here, in a shelter, music felt out of place, too personal, too exposed. His voice followed, rough and worn like boots that had walked too many winters. It was not trained, not beautiful in the usual sense. It cracked on the higher notes and sank low when he spoke of pain. But there was no performance in it. No attempt to impress. He sang in Russian, slowly, clearly. About a little girl in wool socks sliding across a wooden floor. About bread crusts dipped in tea so they would last longer. About laughter echoing in a one-room apartment while the stove clicked and cooled. A spoon paused midair. A conversation faltered. The old man's hands moved with surprising confidence. The guitar knew him. Every scrape of his fingers, every muted string carried years of kitchens, courtyards, and long evenings without electricity. This was not a song learned, it was a song lived. His voice grew steadier as he went on, as if the act of singing warmed him from the inside. He sang of promises made under falling snow, of telling a child, "Hold on, spring always comes." He sang as though she were sitting right there, just beyond the rows of folding tables, listening with wide eyes. Someone near the door stopped shuffling their feet. A volunteer froze with a tray in her hands. The shelter, once full of noise, began to empty itself of sound. The song continued, weaving its way through the cold air. Not loud, not demanding, but impossible to ignore. The song did not end quickly. It lingered, stretching itself across the hall like a slow snowfall, settling into every corner. By the time the old man reached the final verse, the shelter had fallen into a silence so complete it felt fragile, as though one careless sound might shatter it. A woman standing near the windows pressed her scarf to her mouth. Her eyes were red, fixed not on the singer, but somewhere far beyond the fogged glass. She was seeing her own kitchen another winter, another child she had once promised to protect. A man with broad shoulders and a laborer's hand stared down at his boots, his jaw clenched tight, breathing carefully through his nose as if holding himself together by force alone. The volunteer who had first spoken to the old man forgot the soup growing, cold in her hands. A tear slipped down her cheek and she did not wipe it away. She had heard hundreds of stories since taking this job, stories of loss, of hunger, of families broken by poverty and time, but none of them had sounded like this. None of them had been sung. The old man's voice wavered for a moment, cracked under its own weight. He paused, swallowed, then continued. His fingers brushed the strings more gently now, almost reverently. The final lines were barely above a whisper, words meant for one small listener, not a room full of strangers. When the last chord faded, it did not disappear. It hovered, trembling in the air as if unsure whether it was allowed to leave. No one clapped. Hands remained still. Chairs did not scrape. Even the heating pipes seemed to quiet themselves. In that suspended moment, the shelter no longer felt like a place of emergency or charity. It felt like a memory, shared, fragile, painfully human. A child at the far end of the room tugged at her mother's sleeve and whispered, "Mama?" The sound was enough. The spell broke, but gently, like ice melting rather than cracking. People began to breathe again. Someone wiped their face with the back of a sleeve. Another crossed themselves quickly, almost ashamed of the gesture. The man with the work boots turned away, shoulders shaking once before he steadied himself. The old man lowered his head, eyes closed, as though he had given something away and needed a moment to recover. He did not look up to see the tears. He did not need to. He had heard them in the silence. The old man remained, seated for a moment after the silence loosened its grip on the room. His fingers rested on the guitar strings, stopping their last faint vibration. When he finally opened his eyes, they were wet but calm. He looked around the hall as if waking from a long journey, surprised to find himself among strangers again. "She'll eat now," he said quietly, almost shyly. "She always does." The words did not sound like hope or pleading. They sounded like certainty. No one laughed. No one questioned him. A woman stepped forward first, pressing a few folded rubles into his open palm. Her hands shook as she did it. Then another person came, and another. Money appeared, but also gloves, a loaf of dark bread wrapped carefully in paper, a jar of honey with the label half peeled away. These were not donations given out of pity. They were offerings given with a strange sense of gratitude. The volunteer knelt beside him. "Where is your granddaughter?" she asked softly. He smiled, a small, tired smile. "In a warm place tonight," he answered. "That's enough." She nodded, understanding that some answers were not meant to be opened further. Someone brought him a bowl of soup. He accepted it, cradling it with both hands, breathing in the steam as if it carried more than warmth. He ate slowly, deliberately, like a man honoring a ritual rather than satisfying hunger. Around him, people resumed their quiet movements, but the room had changed. Voices stayed low. Faces were gentler. Near the door, the woman with the scarf wiped her eyes and pulled out her phone. She typed a message she had been afraid to send for years. The man with the work boots took off his cap and stood for a long moment, thinking of a promise he had broken, and one he could still keep. The old man finished his soup and stood. He slung the guitar back over his shoulder, lighter now, as if the song had unburdened it. Before leaving, he turned once more toward the room. "Thank you for listening," he said. But they knew the truth. It was not they who had given him something that night. It was he who had fed them, reminding them that love could still exist in cold places, that even when bread was gone, a song could carry a child through the dark. Outside, the snow continued to fall, and somewhere in Russia, a little girl waited listening with a spoon in her hand.